Hello guys and welcome to today's video. So this is our part 2 for data flows in Azure Data Factory. In part 1 we have discussed about what are data flows, how we can create data flows and perform advanced level of transformation using the Spark clusters present in data flows. We have also went through data flow debug and seen how the clusters basically work. Okay, so in today's video we will be discussing more about, or we will be seeing live examples of how we can do some transformations and play with our data that is present in our sources, okay, using data flows. So let's get started. So in this ADF portal, on the left side we have our data flow section. So I'll go and create a click on new data flow, which opens our canvas. So all these things, like how we can create a data flow or start creating a data flow, has already been covered in part 1. You can go and check that video in the description link below. So in this video what we are going to basically do is we are going to check the activities of joining, aggregate, and getting maximum saving those values into different sinks. Okay, so we will be seeing all these activity, and we will be going through the small properties that are present for each of the sync available, or each of the activities available. So in today's, first of all, we will be going through the data that we are going to check. So in my database, I have these two table, daily stock data, which basically contains the values like the stock symbol, their price, market cap, and date-wise data I have for three different companies. And in the second table, I have the dimensional data, which means a few of the properties data, like description and the sector of these stocks. So my first task will be to basically join these data and use the join data for next steps. So in SQL, we can simply use the, I would say, joins, inner join, left join, or right join based on our requirement. The same way we can do in data flow. So first of all, we'll go and add our data set. So I want basically two sources which will be pointing to two different tables. So I will click on add source and select a data set. So as of now, my data set is already created for my Azure SQL database. I have my database where I have two different tables, which is either T1 and the second one is T2. Now in ADF, I have a link service over which my data set is created. So this is my data set in ADF, which takes a parameter, which takes a parameter for the table name. So this data set points to our SQL database, and in the data set, I can pass the parameter like T1 or T2 based on the requirement. So this DS data set is the data set that I've created and will be using in data flows only. So in the dataset part, I will use a link that is created, and later when we basically execute this data flow, then we can pass the parameter values. So let's change the source name so that it will be easy to recognize. So I will use it as P1. Okay, and if I go to data preview, so these data preview and all has already been discussed, how we can enable our data flow debug and how we can basically uh, check the output at each and every step. So if I refresh the data, okay, so it is asking me no value given for my table name parameter. So we can do one thing. Either I can go in the source option, and instead of pointing it to table, I can basically directly point it to source option. I have the input type as table or query, which means if my input type is table, so whichever table my data set is pointing, so if ds is pointing to t1, then this particular source t1 means the data which is present in the database and which is being passed as a parameter to my data set. Okay, the same table will be used in the source over here. Now what happens is I'm using a same data set with multiple parameters. So in the data flow, there's no option to pass parameters. So it is hard for us to basically go to a data preview and see what kind of table I'm going to point. So the alternative is, instead of directly pointing into a table, I can specify the table directly in the query. So the table name can be specified if I execute this data flow through my pipeline. So if you see, if I go to my pipelines and add a data flow over there, now in the settings tab, if I open the data flow, then it will give me the option to add the table name over here. Okay. But if I am only dealing with my data flow as of now for development purpose, then I don't get the option to basically enter the parameters, table parameters. So instead of that, I can go to the query section and I can specify the exact table from where I want the data. So start from daily stock data is my data that I want. Then I will go to the projections and import the dummy projections so that I can use those columns for my further activity. Till it completes, I will go and add a new source, which will be T2, and it will point to my second table. So the same way, I will select a data set. Over here, I need to give some table names. So I will specify the table name as select star from is my second table stock description. Same way in the projection, I will go and import the projections so that I will be able to see what all columns I'm going to deal with. Now, once I've imported a projection of both the sources, I can go ahead and create a join over them. So for that, the plus sign that we see over here, whenever we will click this, it will give us the list of all the activities or transformations that can be done on the source. Okay. So my requirement is to join these data. So if you want to search the required transformation, you can search it over here. So I have this join. So let's click on join section. Now in the join section, it gives us all the basic things that we want to apply over our two data set. So left stream and right stream is basically the table that we want to connect. So if I give you an example of SQL, how we do a join over here. So over here, we can do something like inner join, daily stock data. The common column is basically stock underscore symbol equal to stock description dot stock symbol. So this is how we join tables in our SQL. The same way we need to do in our data flow. So I will select the tables that I want to use. The left stream is T1 and right stream is T2. And what kind of join it will be? It will basically be an inner join. So if both the column matches, then only the output will be given. So if both the column matches, only for those column the output will be given. Over here, I have the option for fuzzy matching. Fuzzy matching means it will not do the exact string matching. It will match the values to the most similar values in the second table. So I will disable this because I don't want fuzzy matching. I want exact matching. Join conditions, on which column basically I want to join these two data sources, that is stock symbol. So I will be adding the stock symbol in the join conditions. So join settings are done. We'll head to optimize. Now in optimize, we have some options of broadcast and partition option. So what does broadcast means? Broadcast means data flow will basically save the entries of any of the data sources, either T1 or T2, in memory, so that it can do the I would say computation more faster. But it is only recommended for those data set where we have less number of rows. So if the number of rows are high, it can basically give you out of memory error if your cluster is not that strong to hold a big set of memory. So if you are sure about what kind of data you're getting, you can keep it as auto fixed, or if you're not sure, then you can keep it as off. So inspect and data preview, let's keep it at as default. Let's refresh and see what output our join one will give. So in join one, now you see I have all the columns from the table one, as well as you can see the description and sector coming from table number two. Okay. So this is how we basically get the required set of columns using the joins present in the two tables. Now, once our join is completed, what we can do is we can use another query to select only the required columns present in these two, uh, to select only required number of columns coming from this particular join. So now I will go and click on select. Now in select, as the name suggests, we can select only those columns which are basically required for our use. So by default, multiple settings have been applied over here. If you want, you can go through each settings, but to keep it default, we can basically use whatever is already mentioned over here. So in the select statement, when we check the default settings, there are multiple settings over here. Okay, so the first is basically options: skip duplicate input columns and skip duplicate output columns. So data flow is smart enough to basically decide if we are getting duplicate columns from the joins or from the input. So in our case, duplicate columns are coming. Why? Because my T1 is also having column as stock symbol, and my T2 is also having columns stock symbol, and other columns are also present. But when we join these two data, so we get columns from all the tables T1 and T2. So all the columns from T1 and all the columns from T2, which means stock symbol will be duplicated. So either I can select this option of skip duplicate input rows, or I can basically uncheck them and select all the columns that are required manually. So it says T1 at the rate stock symbol and T2 at the rate stock symbol. So I can specify which tables should return the stock symbol, either T1 or T2. If I don't want to the stock symbol from T2, I can simply go and delete it. Okay, so this is how I configure my select statement. If I go in data preview section and refresh it, I will be seeing that only stock symbol from T1 and rest of the columns from T1 and T2 will be visible to us. So once our, yeah, so this is the output of stock symbol. Now we can use this activity and do our further computation. So next we will be using something like aggregate. So for example, now what I want is I want the maximum stock price for each company, or basically for each stock symbol. Okay, so how I can do is I can basically click on this plus sign and see which activity I can use. So as of now, our requirement is to basically get the maximum, which is aggregation. Okay, so I will use the aggregate activity. Now when we click on the aggregate activity over here, it gives us the option to select the input stream. So my input stream is select one. So select one, which is basically selecting the required columns. Now there are two options: group by and aggregates. So group by means which column, based on which column you need to find the aggregate, or you need to group the data. So our requirement is basically for stock symbol, because I want to find the maximum based on each stock symbol. So I've selected the group by as stock symbol. And in the aggregate section, what I want is I want to save it in the stock price column, and the maximum values should be there. So either you can do is you can add a new column over here, something like max stock underscore symbol. Okay, or you can either save the max value in the existing columns, which is the stock price. So your stock price value will be replaced, and it will be replaced with the basically the maximum value. So I will go and use a new column, which is my max underscore stock underscore price. And in the expression, what I want is I want the maximum of my stock price column. So I will open this expression builder. I will write max of stock price. So now what is happening is my data is being grouped by the stock symbol, and for each stock symbol I will be finding the maximum values. So let's go and see what my data looks like after this aggregation. So let's refresh it and see the output. Now see what it gave me. It gave me output for each stock symbol and the maximum values for them. So if I'm having four rows for each stock symbol, so out of those four rows, it will give me the maximum part. So let's go and save that in a sync value. So I will click on the plus part and select the sync as sync activity. And in the sync activity, I basically need to go and put the data set where I want to save it. So I want to save it in the SQL database only. So I will select the Azure DB dataset. So in settings part, you can go and check what all insert or upsert logic you want to use. I only want to insert the values, okay? And I want to recreate the table every time this data flow runs. So it will drop the table and it will recreate the data or recreate the table with the fresh data. So you can choose the truncate table option, like the schema of the table remains over there, but the table is truncated every time this runs and it is loaded with the new data. Same way, there are multiple options in the errors tab. You can go and configure a link service for your Azure Data Lake storage, and you can save all the rows where error has occurred and data flow was not able to save it. So you can go and do that. In the same way, our mapping, optimize, inspect, they can be used based on your requirement. If you want to optimize thing, you can go and set some partitioning. Okay, so there are multiple properties. You can go over each based on your requirement. So my sync is configured. So let's see if this particular data flow works fine or not. Okay, so I will go to my pipeline, and over here I've already added this data flow activity. Now you see this data flow activity is asking for the all the parameters that are being used. Okay, so there are two parameters T1 and T2 over where I need to pass the table name. So these table will name will be daily stock data and daily description. Sorry, stock description. You can pass it over here, or else if you check the data flow, the data source that we have created, in the source option I have specified the query. So no matter which table name you specify, it will execute this query and get the data from the two different tables, because I've mentioned two different queries in both the data set. So you can give the data name table name over here, or you can skip it. But in the sync part, I need to give the table name where I want to save the data. So as it contains the maximum of each stocks, so I will give it as stocks underscore price underscore max. So this table is where my data will be saved. So let's go and execute this particular pipeline. So now we can see the data flow run is complete. Let's go back to our database and see whether the table name that we have specified, it has the required set of data or not. So get back to our database, select star from table name and execute it. So now you can see the required columns that we have seen in data flow. The maximum stock price for each stock symbol has been saved. Okay, so this is how you can use the aggregation. You can save the sum, maximum, average, whatever is your requirement. Based on that, you can save it. Okay, now, what we can do is you can use any of the steps, okay, like aggregate, select one, join one that we see over here as a source of another activity. Now, for example, I want to use this same select one and save the complete data from the select one inside another sync. Okay, so what happens is our data gets read from two sources. First set of stream works where my joining is happening, select is happening, aggregate is happening, and that is being saved to sync. Now I want to use this join as well and the select as well, and simply save this select in the sync. Okay, and also want the aggregate as well and save the output in the sync one. So what you can do is you can basically, as I told, use any of the data. So you can use any of the data as a source for another activity. So as I want for the select, so after the select I have this plus option. Let's click on that and add a new branch. Now see, all the data coming from the select one will be used in the new branch. Okay, and new branch will be having all the activities, output of all the activities which are being happening before select one. Okay, so now I will use the select one, and whatever new activities I want over here, I can add it. So you can use some ranking function, you can use the window function. Okay, you can sort the output of this select one, you can filter some rows from that. So whatever things you can do in SQL, you can add the same over here, just but only using the UI, in the UI manner. Okay, so let's go and add a new sync over here. In the sync, I will be using all the same configuration. Let's use the SQL database. In the settings, I want to recreate the table. Okay, and yeah, that's it. So now my two streams will be running. It will be running reading data from T1 and T2. It will be joining it. After joining, two different steps will be happening. First is aggregation, and next one is simple saving of the selected data. So let's head back to our pipeline one. Now in pipeline one, I have added a new sync. So I need to pass the parameter for that. So it will be stock underscore complete underscore data. And let's debug it now and let's see the output of this new data flow. So you see, now our data flow run is complete. Let's head back to our database and see the required data. So select star from stock complete data and let's run it. And over here we can see all the values which are coming from the both the tables. So this is how we basically use the branchings in our data flow. Okay, you can add branch at any step and then create a new stream from that particular branch. Okay, so this is all about how we create data flows and how we create activities in data flow. So there are n number of activities. The more you practice, the more you will get familiar to it. Okay, so derive column, select, aggregate, surrogate key, pivot. So all these terms are completely similar to SQL. Okay, so you just need to practice it. Okay, so this is all about data flow, and as I told, we can execute a data flow from our pipeline. We can chain it with multiple set of activities. For example, first of all, I am adding a copy activity to get data from my from some of my external sources to my own system. Then once that data is present in my system, I can use that data set in the data flow and then use the data flow to dump that data to one of my own I would say database or data lake storage. Then again create a copy activity or some another activity to basically fetch that data from the source where data flow has saved it and send it to some xyz places. Okay, so this is how you can chain data flow just like other pipeline activities. Okay, so yeah, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much. Do like, share, or subscribe the channel if you find this video helpful. Thank you so much.